And welcome everybody, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to this event. So it's great to be here. It's a year since I was last here talking about BIM in the UAE, and what's really fantastic to see is how much things have moved forward. So I think we can safely say that BIM is here to stay, and for great reasons. I think the reasons that have already been discussed, really. We're in a situation where we've got ever-increasing demands on the built environment, social demands, people want growth, people want things to be better, but at the same time we've got an ever-decreasing amount of more or less everything you need to meet that need. Less resource, less money really around the world to provide all of these things. So there's an underlying driver which is not going to change, which is this need for more for less. So more for less, been around a long time. It's what kind of companies say when they want to squeeze things and increase productivity, increase profit. But in the current economic situation, and I think really the ongoing economic situation, it's actually a kind of fundamental necessity. So BIM is here to stay. I think the reasons that we've got BIM here to stay are really about technology being the enabler. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is what do I see as the future of BIM, and give you some examples of how we're actually implementing that. So it seems as you go around the world that everything's about BIM. Conferences, there's a whole industry around BIM conferences, and everyone's talking about implementation plans and national government plans and so on. The focus is all around BIM. My view when I took on my role was I was really working towards, and still am working towards, the time when I actually am no longer considered to be the BIM champion, when we don't need a BIM champion, when BIM becomes business as usual. So in the UK, we've reached this plateau where we have the government mandate, we have level 2 BIM established and a requirement. But what's really driving BIM forward now, I think both in the UK and here and elsewhere, is the commercial business driver. What is the point of BIM? So I think this is really where we need to focus our attention. We hear that everything is about BIM at a conference I was at last week in London. More or less covered under the term BIM was great design efficiency, better design optimization, better cost optimization, construction planning, construction methodology, construction technology. We've heard about 3D printing, and then going on to handover documentation, through life operational efficiency, basically everything. So we end up in a position where we have a term BIM which is being kind of superimposed on a bigger picture, which is actually about driving efficiency into the entire industry, whoever the participants are, whether they be designers, constructors, fabricators, manufacturers, suppliers, and then owners, operators, and maintainers, through the use of technology that's available today and through more collaborative working methods. So is it that everything is about BIM, or is it really that BIM is about everything? And my proposition is the latter, and therefore my kind of prediction really, if you look at the future of BIM, both here in GCC but also globally, is that over the years the term will kind of drop away, because actually what it will mean is just doing good business in an efficient way, using today's technology and introducing more collaborative and efficient working practice, which is basically what we all have to do to make our businesses grow and survive. So the proposition really is that BIM as a term will be time limited, but the fundamentals of what we mean by BIM and what we're all talking about in these conferences will continue, because it's fundamental good business practice. There's another level beyond this, though, which takes us into a world which is kind of beyond the traditional interpretation of BIM relating to building information modeling, and into a new area of value, and it's to do with the value of information. So here we have a graph which I'm going to come back to and use to demonstrate how we are actually adding value through BIM, which talks about how we can get more value out of data. So this is presented in the context of more efficient working at design stage, at construction stage, and through life. And I mean, I guess I've been using this slide for a few years, and the focal points that I'm going to come back to are avoiding the loss of data, particularly in the transitions between different partners, for example, designer to constructor and constructor to owner, where we are still largely using, as Chris mentioned earlier, methodologies which haven't really changed for, well, at least 50 years. And this has to change because the technology is there. But what about beyond the conventional idea of information and data? What's coming down the line? So I think what we're starting to see a lot of people looking at is the bigger value of data and information, where we start to look beyond just thinking about the use of the data and information for the construction and maybe the physical maintenance of the asset to get these better outcomes. There's kind of a potential added value to the data which is greater than that. And those of you from kind of more of an IT background will be aware of the kind of massive ballooning of the availability of information, the interaction with individuals through apps, smartphones, devices, and so on, and the potential value that can bring as an additional income. So effectively, the data, the asset data, becomes an asset in itself. So this, I think, is where we're going. I think, in order for asset owners to actually realize that potential value, then they need to develop organizational information structures, and they start to need to require that the information that is given to them by their suppliers fits, which is exactly what the RTA have already demonstrated that they are doing. And once you've got organized data, then the additional value starts to come out of it. The whole reason that people are able to write apps, and some of them make a lot of money, is because they are accessing open, organized information. That's what enables them to do it. And until you have organized information, you can't really get that additional value. So making information available is critical. I've mentioned on here the security of the information. So this is a very important area that we're certainly studying a lot at Mott MacDonald. I remember going up to do a presentation in the UK to our UK Defence Information Organisation, who are one of our big clients in Britain, and I was talking to them about getting their information organised. Now, I don't know much about the way things are organised here in terms of this sort of level of organisation, but I mean, in a way, it was kind of surprising to find that their asset information was, well, it wasn't really organised. They had lots and lots of as-fitted information, cabinets full of drawings, filing cabinets full of information, but getting at it when they needed it physically around the asset to maintain, upgrade, repair, and so on was not that easy, like most of our assets these days, I think, around the world. So I put forward to them the proposition that they should get all this information organised, they should get an organised database, they should make all the information easily available to people that need it in the field and internally for maintenance planning and efficient management of their huge estate. And as the conversation went on, they were very nervous about this because they said, well, if we get all of our information organised, then it's going to be a lot easier for somebody to kind of hack in and find out things that we don't want them to find out. So for a while, the conversation sort of drifted a little bit across to the idea was, maybe the best way to keep all of our information really secure is to kind of maintain it in a state of chaos, because that way nobody's actually going to be able to find anything out. But it didn't take us very long to realize that this was not the great idea for the future. So we have to actually look to organize data within secure structures. And so we've got to think about organized data, asset data, through a database view rather than through a model-based view. So you start to think of data, and the model becomes a vision and interpretation of the data, rather than sticking more data into, let's say, typical BIM type tools. So I think this is the way things are going. And the outcome of this is that we're going to have better overall asset performance, but also new income streams. So the business strategy has to drive the digital transformation. BIM should not be driving the business. The business needs to drive a digital strategy, which is effectively what BIM is part of. We see the potential for the existence of organized data in an organization to go on to the balance sheet, because it has a value. And so as you're starting to think about designing and constructing, building, owning assets, this is something to start to think ahead, because you could be adding to the value of your asset by including the value of the digital asset over and above the book value of the built asset itself. Data will have a value. To retain the value, it has to be rooted in the physical world, which is where our industry comes in, because it's about physical things. So the industry is at the center of it. It won't all be taken over by IT people. It's about our industry. Not that I've got anything against IT people, for those of you in the crowd, but it's about connecting the physical industry to the value of the data. And then that data will also therefore deliver the better outcome for the citizens, which is the fundamental requirement of the UAE, along with most other places around. It's about a sustainable future where people can live happy, healthy, sustainable lives. And so connecting the data through into the people, again, if you take the smartphone example, the whole reason we've got lots of data interchangeability in the world of smartphones is because things like classification and what you might call taxonomy have all been sorted out amongst the big companies. Everything is called the same thing, whether it's a name, an address, or this or that. All the data in there is on a standard set of taxonomy, which means that it's all interchangeable, which means that all the different companies can enable data to be moved across efficiently. So we've got to get to that point in the construction industry as well, which is a huge task because classification systems are complicated. Everyone's always got a better idea. Mine's better than yours. International standards are hard to develop and hard to agree. But we have to resolve these issues if we're really going to get the value out of this data. So just very quickly, I know you're going to have a lot of technical presentations today and see a lot of great examples of applications of BIM. I'm just going to give you a couple of areas specifically where we are already extracting substantial business value, monetary return, which we can both share with our clients and our project partners, and also make sure that we can look after our own margins in a construction industry where certainly where I come from in the UK, everybody is being squeezed. Contractors, consultants, the money is always tighter. So we have to find efficiency. So where are we finding it? This is one example that we're doing a lot of work on in Mott MacDonald, automation. So automation fits nicely within BIM because you've got a standard process, you're doing things in standard ways. So we prepare and write our own apps. We've now got a centralized capability in Mott MacDonald to share these. And these is just an example of an early one we did to save time, save money. So why did we do it? This is the question here. This is in Singapore. It's a waste-to-energy plant. Why did we do this automation? We did not do it because we wanted to have some automation stuff that we could put up at a BIM show. We did it because we had a requirement to design 860 piles on a design and build for a contractor who wanted cost accuracy to the extent that part of our return was dependent on the accuracy of the estimation. And we only had a very limited amount of time to do it in because that was the reality of the situation facing this contractor at tender design. We worked out that our own procedures, getting geotech information from here, passing it over to PAL people here, putting it into PAL spreadsheets, extracting it from that, producing tables and drawings, sending them off to the quantity surveyors, getting them to price it, sending it back, and maybe looking at a few iterations, would take longer than the entire time we had available to do this job. So we wrote the automated sequence, just a simple thing in Visual Basic type of technology, which automatically collected all the information from the boreholes, transferred it into our pile designs, populated all the pile designs, and then automatically again extracts that information, sent it across through Open Information Exchange into our estimating software, which in this case is Vico, Trimble, and gave us the answer in dollars. So effectively, what we could do is we could look at risk, we could look at varying ground conditions, we could look at different pile configurations, and by exchange, day by day, pass it through the automated sequence and get the answer back in dollars. So we actually got the money back on this innovation on that project. Because one thing about innovation in automation is you've got to get your money back fast, because 2 years down the line, technology has moved on, and then there's another whole lot of innovation to be done and another lot of automation. So if you're going to invest in automated sequences, get your money back fast. That's what would be my recommendation. And here you can see the kind of process. I won't labor you all with the process, but process is fundamental. You cannot automate sequences unless they are within a standardized process, because you've got to be able to use them over and over again. So get your processes sorted out, and then you can automate within the process map. Just quickly, another example here. This is about integrated design and construction. So this is a project in London. This is the Northern Line Extension project, underground railway with stations and lots of interfaces with the buildings above. And this is really about model-based collaboration with contractors. So even today, with BIM being pretty well understood and the technology works, it's there, we find on quite a lot of projects, we do a whole lot of modeling, and then eventually, when we hand it over to the constructor, it gets dumbed down into a series of contractable deliverables, which are normally drawings. Hopefully, if we're doing our job well, we'll extract those drawings from the model, but then the contractor typically will kind of start building new models with their own fabricators, and we'll pass them back and forward to us, and we'll try and spot the difference and so on. So this is fundamentally inefficient. What we're doing in this case is we're actually leading the transition of the data models through from the technologies we're working with, which in this case is Bentley technology, through into the technology that the contractor wants to use to run their automated plant, because they're using automated construction off-site fabrication, which is Nemetschek. And we are leading everybody through this process, bringing the fabricators into the team. At no stage does the value of the model get dumped and you start again, and we're working out a collaborative arrangement on risk sharing. So it doesn't mean we're suddenly the experts in fabrication. It means we bring in the experts in fabrication, keep our hands on the data transition to avoid the data loss that I showed you in the previous diagram. So this is led by JV Ferrovial Laing O'Rourke. I know Laing O'Rourke are also very strong in this area here locally. Collaboration, working with the fabricators as part of the team is fundamental. And you'll see my note there, trust and recognition of value of all contribution is key to this. Everyone's got a part to play in construction. The one that designs, thinks up great concepts and so on, the one that has to do all the complicated project management and take all the pressure, the one that actually fixes things together. All of these people and many more have roles to play. And when you're looking at collaborative BIM, you need to get all their inputs in. So this idea of trust and recognition of every party that goes together to make a built asset is central. So we, on this project, thought right through from construction to design and to installation. So on this slide here, you can see the concept ideas, you can see the BIM models, you can see how that was actually transitioned into, for example, rebar sequencing, and then ultimately it was also communicated back to prefabrication plant. We were able to track each individual beam, each individual element, all the way from the works, all the way through to being lifted in, and then hand over the appropriate data for those that need it down the line. So again, process, another process map. This is based on BS 1192, which is now becoming an ISO, which is going to be extended internationally. And certainly we in Mott MacDonald have adjusted all of our processes around this BS 1192. You don't need to know the details, you need to know process. You cannot operate BIM unless you've got your process sorted out. And just finally, another example at the point of handover. This is the third big value loss point. Here, it's about engaging with the operator. What do they need to know? And making sure that the information is prepared right from the beginning in a way that enables it to be handed over to the owners based on what they need to know to own, operate, maintain, and modify the asset. So then you get into different ways of looking at things. It's a lot more to do with data than it is to do with graphics. If I want to fix something in this room on this table, I don't need to look at it through a handheld device to know that it's a table and it's there. There are certain things that you don't need to know graphically because they're kind of self-evident. There are a lot of things you need to know non-graphically. So the shift starts to go on to non-graphical information, which is the kind of heart of the database that I was talking about earlier on. So match a digital handover to the owner's needs and extract the relevant information from the early stages that you need for design and construction, and work out what the owner needs to know. Because there are some things you need to know to design, there are some things you need to know to build, and there are other things you need to know to operate. So one has to think that through from the beginning and structure the data to deliver that, that end value. So I think I'll wrap up there. It's really just concluding that think about the value of information, think about the value of data, not only in design, construction, and operation, but also potentially beyond that. Data is an asset, we need to look after it, and BIM is the current kind of terminology around what is actually becoming an all-embracing change. Whether we call it BIM or whether we call it anything else, it's a fundamental change which, if anything, is going to accelerate. So it's great to see that everything's moving ahead quickly here in GCC since I was here last year. Thank you very much.
You talked about that being implemented around a project in Singapore, and it was around driven piles. Now, what do you think is the opportunity in that by using design automation when you look at it in a broader spectrum? So it's something that, as you quite rightly said, you delivered through the requirement of necessity. But when you actually take a step back, what are the actual opportunities for that, do you think, to take that further?
I think one of the big opportunities around automation is to do with looking at risk. So there's always some risk associated in the early stage design because there are unknowns. So how do we mitigate the risk? Well, the more alternative options you can look at very, very quickly, the more scenario plans you can do, the less remaining risk that there is. And with every reduction in residual or perceived risk, there is the potential to lean up the pricing and remove some of the risk pricing. So the ability to look very quickly at alternatives, literally within a day you could look at alternative A, B, C. It also applies to design and working with architects, actually. As an engineer, I can tell you that, you know, over an entire career, I've sort of struggled with the occasional architect that might come up with an alternative solution just after I've invested loads of time in doing a design for his previous idea. In some cases, you might say, well, okay, why don't you leave that idea for the next project? But in other cases, it might be a great idea. So actually, if I can then push this through an automated sequence and say, okay, you know, I've looked at your alternative here, and this is what it does for this and that, the cost, whatever, and the details of construction, and you know, give them a positive response, then, you know, this is a lot better than saying, oh, I've spent all my money, I can't do any more alternatives, and the architect's is a pain, you know, which is kind of where most engineers kind of end up. So actually, it's going to help us to get to greater optimization, both in terms of risk, site condition, design development, because you can do it more quickly. I can do 10 times option with an automated sequence for less money than I can do one option with our previous conventional way of analyzing things.
So you're certainly getting advantages around those aspects, but in a physical context, you would the automation was run around piles. I'm just interested to see in a physical perspective, could you do that? It's not just restricted to piles. It can't be, because that's just it's a functional part of the building. I'm just saying, presumably, it's possible to do superstructure in the same way.
Absolutely. It is absolutely possible to do superstructure. Yeah, I mean, we've got examples, for example, where we have been looking at, let's say, a stadium lighting. So we've got very specific requirements for lighting, flood lighting for TV and so on. And then we've got light sources. So on a major sports project recently, we wrote an automated sequence which would connect the physical model with the location of the lights to an analytical model which would quickly measure each alternative design against compliance with fundamental performance requirements. So, you know, if there's an architectural idea, what about if you move the lights here, 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 and here, or suddenly there's an obstruction because there's an interference with the structure, we can very quickly, and without, you know, putting additional cost in the design development stage, look at alternatives. So structural design through to, in this case, lighting design. So yeah, there are a huge number of opportunities for automated sequencing to increase optimization.
Okay, so any more questions? Any questions from the floor? There's one just down here. First microphone just down the. Sorry, just here actually. Okay, sorry. Take the one further up the aisle. Yep. Go ahead.
Mr. Richard, good morning. We are talking about the future of BIM. Can we look into the past through BIM? We are talking about 30,000 retrofitting buildings in the near future for Dubai. The buildings which are already constructed, around 30,000 buildings need to be retrofitted for energy efficiency and sustainability. Is there any role for BIM to play in that?
So, yes, great question, because I mean, if you look at even here in Dubai, but certainly around the rest of the world as well, like 80% of the physical infrastructure that we're going to have in the coming, say, if we're going to get energy improvements over the next 10 or 20 years, is already here. So we are certainly using BIM in the context of existing assets. So we capture the physical asset. We've been capturing the physical asset up until now, and at this moment through kind of point cloud technology. But recently, you know, I've been hearing about new technologies coming out of gaming, where you can actually start to use a combination of photogrammetry, photographs, just simple photographs, and game technology to build a representation of an existing asset very quickly, very cheaply, and with a much smaller file size than maybe some of the network point clouds. So you can capture the physical. You then have to start to build the asset information around that. So there is work around surveying, and then you start to build up. What I say to, say, an owner who's got multiple assets is you can't just go out and create, you know, BIM models of all your existing assets like tomorrow or by next year, because it's a very expensive activity. But what I do say to asset owners is get yourself a BIM strategy so that every time you go out and touch your existing assets, you might do some surveying here, some photographic capture here, point cloud scan, whatever, you're slowly adding. Don't make the same mistake again in the future of not having all the asset information readily available, because what tends to happen is people go out and they survey, and then 10 years later they want to do another upgrade, and you know, then they go out and survey again because they don't believe the information they've got from the last survey. So, you know, get over that by putting in place a strategy, and then the economic way of building up BIM models of existing assets for future use is kind of build them as you go. So get a strategy, add in the information, and then as you go through the life cycle of your built asset, in 10 years' time, you will have a complete BIM record of everything, and you will be able to update them and modify them based on good, intelligent data. So it's absolutely critical to start to build existing assets into organized information. Absolutely right.
Okay, there's a great point. There's a lot of existing stock out there in Dubai, some of it needing to be repurposed. There was another question over here, just down at the front there, please. You have a microphone, that's it.
Yeah, actually it's very impressive to know there is automation in the design stage. And in regard to the automation in the construction stage, monitoring the construction stage, do you have, actually I read tons of research and many case studies. All of them, they have limitations.
Yes.
Yes. So do you have any case study that doesn't have limitation and successfully achieve the goals?
Well, I would go back to the example that I gave you with Ferrovial Lang O'Rourke, joint venture on London Underground Northern Line extension, which I showed you a couple of pictures of there. We're actually using, or I should say they, in this case the contractor, is actually using a scanning technology to assess completion, and they are also, so that we've got value release is driven out of the model. So how much is actually there? What's the value of what's there? But they're also using scanning to check compliance with design, design tolerances. So we're using technology, which is part of the world of BIM, both to assess progress and program and value release, but also to measure where it's critical, and on underground you've got certain tolerances and so on, that the built asset is actually within tolerance immediately at the stage it goes in. So that technology is already up and running, basically, and I think in this case, certainly on a technical project like Underground Railway, it's already being used. So it's, I'd say that is the way forward. I don't think contractors like Langeroog Ferroviair will go back from that on any complex project, because they're seeing the benefits. It's saving them time and money and cutting out their risk.
And surely, going on from that question, surely the investment can't be that much in terms of the actual value you're getting. It must be entirely achievable from a return on investment perspective.
It's most definitely achievable. The cost of the technology is coming down. The cost of data storage is coming down. The technology, I mentioned earlier, the impact of gaming technology is leading to reductions in file sizes, because some of the well, I say earlier, but actually current point cloud type files that go around the place are like gigantic, and they lead to a perceived need for IT infrastructure investment, which is probably greater than is really necessary. So you've got this balance, you've got the upward drive on data size, and then you've got to balance it against the cost of data transfer infrastructure. So we need to push down the data size, not allow it to go higher and higher, by controlling what goes in the model. I mean, I can show you models which have got loads of totally unnecessary kind of data, and you get people like doing an early stage design model, and then they'll say, oh, I want to make it look a bit nicer, so they'll grab some manufacturer's files off the internet, which no one's even deciding whether they're specifying it or not, but they make it look nice, so they'll drag them in, and then suddenly you've got a model which is like 50 times bigger than it needs to be, because it's got a load of random data in there which is not actually needed at that time. So good practice, push down the data, but at the same time look at how we're going to gain access to increased data storage at lower cost. So it's going to be,
That's an interesting point. There's just time for one more question just down the front there.
Yes, I completely agree with what you said about taxonomy and the importance of it to make data interoperable. Would like to hear your thoughts on how far is the industry coming along in terms of having a standard set of asset, element, or attribute names, or code and parameter values or units.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so we do have some standards around the place, which are, things like uniclass, omniclass, and so on. The main problem, I think, at the moment that we're facing is probably to do with a lack of a coherent national or international body which is really tying all this together. So what we've got is we've got a couple of major branches, and then you've got Building Smart. In the UK, we've adopted this COBE schema, which came from the USA 10 years earlier, from the USA defense estates, which is another way of looking at things. So I think coherent international standards, we've got the ISO now coming through around BS 1192, but that doesn't actually cover classification systems, and it's a big challenge. Certainly in the UK now, I can tell you that the biggest barrier to a coherent classification system, which is really focused around uniclass, getting that really right, is really at the moment funding. Because building up this classification system in the UK, the uniclass, and now uniclass 2016. Is been a little bit of a cottage industry, this institution, that institution. People are trying to do it, but they haven't got a lot of money. So I think probably greater attention needs to be paid at building up some national and international bodies that take a grip of this, because it needs to be accelerated to get these benefits of open exchange. Bring in Building Smart. You get a little bit of competition, to be honest. We've got the best idea. I mentioned very briefly in my piece, I don't know if you picked up on that, but everyone thinks they've got the best idea, and so bringing those people together is important as well, I think, into a unified kind of common standard.
That's certainly something we've got to look at in the future. pretty much that's going to be a session that could run and run there. Pretty much run out of time for this session, and but Richard's going to be around for the rest of the day, I think, aren't you? So please collar him during the breaks, and I think some of those themes we're also going to be looking at later on in the day as well. Richard Shennan, thank you very much. Thank you.